Thank you so much. Well, we have all heard a lot about the easy problems of AI now. Now we're going to focus on the hard problem of AI. At least if you believe the leading philosophers of mind like David Chalmers, for example, who defined the hard problem of consciousness. Why is consciousness a subjective experience of being? Why do we have that? 1974, the famous philosopher Thomas Nagel wrote also a very famous paper titled, What is it like to be a bat? And he defined consciousness as a being, an entity is conscious if there is something like to be that entity. So my first question to the panel, will it ever be like something to be an AI? Åsa, you start.
Possibly. The hard thing is going to be knowing when. But then again, it's hard to know that there is something like it, what it's like to be you, too. So the same epistemic problem arises. It's going to be hard to know.
You mean that it's only we know that we are conscious ourselves, but we don't know that anyone else is?
I mean, if you go all out subjective, the way Nagel does and the way these people do talk about what it's like to be, then yes, indeed, you know that from your own point of view, and you only have one own point of view. I don't have access to your consciousness, yours, you could all be automatons, as far as I'm concerned, if you go that way. Now, I'm not actually thinking of consciousness that way, but if you do, and then you will get the same knowledge problem with the machines as with people. Now, with people, we kind of think that it's not a problem because we're all kind of similar, so of course we all have this point of view and this subjective experiencing and all that. Machines are going to look very different, even if they become like robotic and do stuff. They're going to look different. So the epistemic challenges will be very, very big. How do we know when they become conscious?
But Philip, do you think that it ever will be like something to be an AI?
I don't, as impressive as large language models are, and I'm very blown away by the recent progress, I don't think we're ever going to get consciousness out of just more and more complicated information processing. Now, I don't think consciousness is something magical and supernatural, so it has to be possible to create artificial consciousness. But I think we should be envisaging something more like an artificial living system. Maybe in the first instance, something of the complexity of a bacterium. Maybe in 5,000 years, we could get to an artificial living conscious entity of the complexity of a human being. So I guess I think we're not even really at first base when it comes to artificial consciousness, as distinguished, of course, from artificial intelligence.
Yeah, that's another thing. But today, we're talking about the subjective experience. Okay, so you say 5,000 years. Adam?
I didn't say how long it would take.
No, that's true. But
it could be 10,000 years. Just
okay, but Adam?
I think that the existing large language models are unlikely to produce conscious experience, like Philip was saying. But I do think that it is possible to build something artificially conscious without going the biological route. I'm just not convinced that we can do it using existing models or even using existing computer architecture. You know, we don't have a fully worked out theory of consciousness. We don't even have like a significant portion of a worked out theory of what consciousness is and how it works.
Speak for yourself.
Well, okay.
Well,
we can't all be you.
We know it emerged in the neural networks of our brains.
It's true. It's true.
So why shouldn't it emerge here?
Because neural networks on computers are not the same as the neural networks in brains. You know, the connections, the kinds of connections that exist in neural networks on computers are not the same as the ones in brains. They don't capture all of the features. Some of those features might be important. We don't know. You know, and it may even be possible in principle to build an AI using current, you know, hardware and software architectures, but it may be that in practice it's much easier to do it a different way, and that it won't be until we have a fully worked out theory of consciousness that we can look back and say, oh, if we wanted to make one of those conscious, we would have had to go this really bizarre and roundabout route. And it's a good thing that, 200 years later, we went a different way. And that's how we got there.
But according to articles you read now on the web, the ChatGPT-4 has about 1 trillion parameters, which is corresponding to synapses in a rough way to the brain. And the brain has 100 trillion. So it's just a factor of 100. I mean, if we have ChatGPT-X in a few years that have 100 times more than today, why shouldn't consciousness emerge as a phenomena in that system?
Well, because it's 100 trillion synapses is not necessarily the same thing as 100 trillion parameters in a large language model. The functioning of synapses is just not the same as the functioning of the connections in an artificial neural network. There's a lot of richness to that biological phenomenon that is not captured in the computer. I'm not saying it can't be. It absolutely could be. It's just not.
But Philip, you don't believe that it even could be because of your panpsychist view of consciousness, right?
I think that's...
You wrote a book about it.
Well, maybe that's another step, but my starting point is that consciousness has evolved, and if it's evolved, it must make a behavioral difference. Things with unified consciousness must behave differently and hence survive better than things without unified consciousness. So my bet is that as we learn more about the neurophysiological details of the brain, which we're still incredibly ignorant on, really, we will come to see that certain processes in the brain have a certain kind of autonomy in the sense that their behavior cannot be fully predicted from the basic equations of physics, and they will be the processes that embody consciousness. So I think there will emerge such empirical markers of consciousness. Now, when it comes to ChatGPT, the processing is so complicated, we don't really understand exactly what's going on. But I think we have good reason to think that in principle, if not in practice, what's going on could be predicted from the basic equations of physics. So I think we can confidently assert that ChatGPT and anything like this kind of more and more complex information processing is not going to be conscious.
But can I ask you all, you say that the subjective experience must have a survival quality because evolution gave it to us. Is that really true? Take, for example, music. It's not sure that music has a survival quality. It might be just a side effect of our cognitive ability to pattern recognition, which of course had a survival quality. But we could just we could navigate the world through our senses without having this subjective experience of an eye, couldn't we?
Sure. Also. If you think of consciousness the way these people do, maybe, as this very subjective thing. And if you think that there could, in principle, this is a thought experiments that these people often use, that there could, in principle, be a zombie, not the sort of zombies of movies, but a person who behaves exactly like me.
That's David Chalmers.
It's David Chalmers' thought experiment. Behaves exactly like me. You could be married to a zombie for all you know. The person, it's just that this creature doesn't have an subjective dimension. There's no there. The creature behaves as if it had thoughts and feelings and feels pain and all that, but there's nothing, no subjective anything. Such a creature would be evolutionarily just as successful a zombie as a non-zombie. So I think if you do go all that way, subjectively, it's a little hard to see what the explanatory function would be of that construct of consciousness, which is something different from mind. Mind has a huge evolutionary value, so let's talk about that distinction maybe. But if you're just talking about the subjectivity component, it's hard to see what the evolutionary value is.
But define the difference between mind and consciousness here.
Yeah. Well, mind is all sorts of things. It's cognition, it's thinking, believing, desiring, hoping, fearing. It's perception, seeing, touching, it's anxieties. It's all sorts of things that belong to what we think are essential components. Is self-awareness, all these things. They're essential components of what it is to be a person, right? But consciousness, the way that it's spoken about here, is this sort of ineffable quality, this what it's like component that doesn't really go, for example, with thought. What is it like to think that it's a Monday? Not so easy to answer that question. It goes with what is it like to feel a pain? What is it like to fly like a bat?
What's called qualia.
It's the qualia sort of ideas. That's like a corner of mind. Mind has evolutionary value. What it's like, we don't know.
But let us just make clear what is your base beliefs here. Adam, as I understand it, you're a reductionist. You do think that consciousness is an emergent phenomena coming up from the biological, chemical, physical brain, right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think it's emergent in what, philosophers call like the weak sense. I think that it emerges the same way that you can think of traffic patterns as behaving like waves in a fluid, right? That's not because of any sort of coordinated decision making by the individual drivers of the cars in the traffic jam. That's just an emergent property that comes out of features, or in fact, fluid dynamics itself, the behavior of water.
And that's weak emergence.
Yes.
Like
exactly.
the emergent examples we saw before in ChatGPT-4, it's also weak emergent properties.
Yeah. I mean, and I think consciousness is like that. It is something that is unexpected, but ultimately explicable in terms of the fundamental laws of physics and chemistry at work in the brain.
Åsa, do you agree? Or do you have a different position?
No, I think it's emergent in that sense. Sometimes it's used in different senses, right? That it's somehow this thing that emerges out as a complex quality, and it's absolutely impossible to explain how. I don't think it's emergent in that sense. That's a very strong statement.
Philip?
I guess I'm the odd man out here. I have a slightly different view. So, I mean, I think we've been trying for many decades now to explain consciousness in terms of physical processes in the brain, and we've got precisely nowhere. So my proposal, which is an approach that's been gaining traction recently, is to just turn that explanatory project on its head. So rather than starting with physics and physical science more generally and trying to get consciousness out of that, we instead start with consciousness and try and make sense of physics emerging from underlying facts about consciousness. It turns out that that's actually surprisingly easy to do. So I think it's a more promising explanatory project.
You still have an explanatory problem, right? Because how do you get from these microparticles that have this sort of conscious property to a mind? I mean, that's an explanatory challenge that no one has answered so far as I know.
Yes, and if it's that property in the atom, so if you think consciousness is the panpsychist idea of a property in the atom, then it could, of course, appear in ChatGPT-X just as well as a biological brain if it's already in there. Or am I wrong?
Yeah. It depends on the particular version you defend. So yeah, I mean, look, the way I see it, I think the real explanatory virtue of the panpsychist position I defend is its capacity to account for physical reality in terms of underlying facts about consciousness. And this is where the influence of the philosopher Bertrand Russell and certain important work he was doing in the 1920s. I think we should think of Russell as the Darwin of consciousness. I think he essentially solved all the mysteries here, but it got kind of forgotten about for a long time, but there's been a lot of focus on it recently. So I think we do have a satisfactory account of how we could account for the physical reality in terms of underlying facts about consciousness. The mirror image of that is the materialist proposal explaining consciousness in terms of physics. We've got nowhere, and I think there are good philosophical arguments that really is an incoherent project. So we've got one explanatory project that's essentially been completed, but feels a bit weird, and we've got another that's never gone anywhere. So in my mind, it's kind of a no-brainer. I appreciate Ursa's point that we do have this challenge of
explanatory
of making sense of how our consciousness emerges from simpler forms of consciousness. And this is where a lot of the energy of the Contemporary Panpsychist Research Program comes from. I mean, maybe we'll have to take a sort of strong emergentist position on that. Maybe we can make sense of weak emergentism. Either way, that explanatory benefit of accounting for physical reality in terms of underlying facts about consciousness, I think that's enough to make this position very interesting.
But that is not to answer. I mean, the physicalist is challenged. Physicalists can account for physical reality, but they are challenged to explain consciousness, right? That's the challenge. You claim they haven't done that, but now you're saying panpsychists can't do that either. So it's on a par, I would think.
Well, but there is something they certainly are able to reductively explain. And I mean, look, I think we judge a theory on how the parsimony at the fundamental level, how many, we want the fundamental level of reality to be as simple as possible. If materialism can reduce everything to physics, that's very simple. If the panpsychist can reduce everything to consciousness, that's very simple. I mean, the third position, the dualist position, is that they're both fundamental. Maybe consciousness is in the soul. So I think both panpsychism and materialism are attractive positions in terms of Occam's razor because they both end up with something very simple. It's just that with panpsychism, we know how to do it. With physicalism, we don't.
But you reject dualism.
So I've changed my view on this in my book, Galileo's Error, available at all good bookshops.
In Swedish as well.
Oh yes, translated to Swedish. I argued that there was kind of scientific grounds for doubting dualism. I now think the more I speak to neuroscientists, the more I speak to different kind of scientists, I don't think we know enough about the brain to establish that. But as scientists and philosophers, we try to respect Occam's razor. We try to have the most simple theory of reality we can. And, you know, if you can why believe in two kinds of thing when you can get away with one? So that those considerations press us to either materialism or panpsychism, but no one knows how to make sense of materialism.
But
I don't think anybody knows how to make sense of consciousness, whether they're a panpsychist or a materialist, though. Like, just to echo the points made by Åsa and Christer, it really seems to me that if you can explain consciousness but not human consciousness, then, you know, Occam's razor is going to cut against you, right? You know, you've bolted another thing on. You know, like, why do we need rocks to be conscious to explain how humans are conscious?
So it would be nice if we could have a really reductionist kind of panpsychism where really there's just conscious particles and Krista's mind is just a complex combination of them. Great philosophers like Luke Roelofs are trying to make sense of that. That would be great. But even if that can't be done, even if we have to have some levels of consciousness, I still think it's a strikingly parsimonious view in the only fundamental properties we believe in are consciousness properties. If we can account for everything, the facts of science, the facts of consciousness, just in those, without postulating any other properties, just as a kind of physicalism that might have a bit of strong emergence would also be quite simple, even if it has some strong emergence. So get rid of the strong emergence if we can, but if we can't, and we can still bottom out with one kind of property, surely that's got to be an advantage.
But Adam, can I ask you, I mean, your field is in quantum physics, and you know, last year these three men was awarded a Nobel Prize in physics for this work in quantum physics, and I spent an evening with them and talked to them a lot about this, and the three of them told me that we've spent all our lives in quantum physics, and we have no idea whatsoever what the Schrödinger equation or the other equations say about the ontology of reality, okay?
Yeah.
Why couldn't consciousness be a part of that weird reality that we don't know anything about still?
Yeah, I mean, that just kind of strikes me as here's something that we don't have a good final answer to, which is the measurement problem in quantum mechanics. And here's something else we don't have a good final answer to, the hard problem of consciousness. Let's put them together.
Okay, good point.
And then we just have one bigger problem. This just doesn't strike me as a promising approach, you know? Like, what... there is a question in quantum physics about what is happening in quantum systems such that it seems like they behave differently when we're looking versus when we're not looking. There are a lot of promising answers to, or promising approaches to answering that question. that don't invoke the idea that actually, it's conscious observation that makes the difference. It might be that conscious observation is completely irrelevant. It might be that conscious observation, plays some role, but really it's interaction with large numbers of things.
That was a popular theory in the 70s, but as I understand it, not anymore among physicists.
Sure, yeah. I mean, but there are many different approaches. The many worlds approach says that actually when things, like the way that things behave in the quantum world when we're not looking is the same way that they behave when we're looking. And instead, when we look, we sort of get entangled with them and start splitting into different universes. There's lots of different ways of dealing with this. It's not clear to me why we would want or need to invoke consciousness. What properties does consciousness have such that it can collapse wave functions when nothing else can do that? By what virtue can that happen? I'm a physicalist. I think that the brain is made of the same stuff and obeys the same rules as everything else. So why should it be different when it comes to the most fundamental laws of physics?
I mean, maybe we should hope that the theory that consciousness collapses the wave function is false, because otherwise, if we get quantum computers working and they become conscious one day, they will collapse all the wave functions and stop working. So maybe we should...
Actually, I think we're...
Just kidding. Yes, Philip.
No, just briefly, I think we're in the same position here, really. It's been interesting, though, that to see David Chalmers and the philosopher of physics, Kelvin McQueen, make rigorous sense to try and rigorously explore the view that consciousness collapses the wave function. They don't necessarily accept it, but they think, we shouldn't just say, it sounds weird. Let's spell it out rigorously, see what it looks like.
Yeah, that's true. He was here last week, and he said this, that he thinks you should take that idea seriously.
Yeah. But for me as a panpsychist, it doesn't really work out, because if everything's conscious, then we need a transition between, if you think of Schrödinger's cat, when consciousness isn't interacting with the system and the cat is neither alive nor dead, when consciousness does interact with the system and the cat is definitely alive or definitely dead. If consciousness is everywhere, you don't get that transition. So just like a materialist as a panpsych, you need to be a mind-body dualist, I think, to be attracted to that view.
But the physician Sir Roger Penrose, who was awarded a Nobel Prize, I think it was 2020, for black holes research, he has put forth quite a few ideas about consciousness. Actually, two different ideas, I think. One is that the Gödel incompleteness theorem should be a limitation to quantum to consciousness. Let me just explain what Gödel's incompleteness theorem is in 10 seconds. It's the theorem that proves that in a formalized mathematical system, there will always be true statements that is not provable within the system. And his point is, and this is proven, so we know that's true. And his point is that we humans, we can look at a formalized mathematical system and see and understand that this statement is true, but it's not provable within the system. So the human mind can go outside the system, which a computer would never be able to do, because the computer is a formalized system. That roughly is his idea. What's your take on this?
Well, I mean, there are lots. It's very heavily debated in philosophy still, I think, ever since that book came out.
Yeah,
I mean,
the Emperor's New Mind.
And one view, exactly.
Yeah.
One view is that, well, if anything, it shows that the people, the mathematicians who understand Gödel, that we can't account for them in terms as a computational theory of consciousness. Okay. But we have the rest of us, and we have the animals, and we have all of that. So how far does this go? I don't know the latest twists on this debate, and maybe there's some more optimism around that now. But the quantum theory was just something he slapped onto there, because then he thought, well, if it can't be sort of artificial intelligence sort of models can never account for consciousness, we need some other account, and then it just slapped on quantum collapse theory.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, this argument, I mean, it didn't even go back to Penrose. It went back to Lucas in, I believe, the 1950s. But I mean, I think that there are a few ways out of it. One way out is to say, well, there's no barrier to seeing the incompleteness in a different formal system. you can prove the incompleteness of one formal system using another formal system, which is itself incomplete in some other way. There may be an equivalent to Gödel incompleteness for whatever's going on in the human mind. It may just be at some really high level of abstraction that we would not be able to access because there's just no good way of thinking about it, because that's how our brains are architected. I mean, I don't know, but I think that there are reasons to think that sort of formal system is not necessarily a good model, or that sort of limitation on formal systems is not a good objection to a computational theory of mind, because it may well be that we have that kind of limitation and are just not aware of it. Or it may be, another way out of Gödel's incompleteness theorem is contradictions. So it may be that we believe that in the heart of every human mind, there are some contradictory views.
Oh, no.
That we hold. Yes, exactly. And certainly no one's ever had the experience of believing two things that turn out to conflict with each other. So I don't know.
Philip, do you have a take on the
well,
Gödelian issue?
I'm very sympathetic to the argument, actually. I find it quite compelling. And notice, though, it's not particularly an argument about consciousness, but about conscious understanding. Penrose has this intuition that, we just kind of consciously grasp that a certain mathematical statement, it's got to be true. And there's been a return of interest, actually, to thinking about consciousness, not just in terms of pain and seeing red, but in terms of consciously grasping what reality is and what things are and mean. And, I think this is important in the context of AI. If we think back to Turing's classic paper where he designed what we now call the Turing test, he asked in the paper, well, would something that passed the Turing test think? And he said, well, that's a very vague question. I'm going to redefine thought to mean passing my test. And I think, actually, a lot of cognitive science and the AI community has adopted this behavioral notion of understanding and thought, whereas I think our intuitive everyday notion of understanding is when you consciously apprehend that certain things are the case, certain truths about reality, and it's that conscious sense of consciously understanding and thinking that I think AI, assuming it is not conscious, doesn't really have at all. So, I think artificial intelligence is no more real intelligence than an artificial plant is a plant. It's replicating the appearance of intelligence, but it doesn't really consciously understand anything. Where I think Penrose goes wrong, just briefly, is when he takes it all quantum.
That's my other question.
I think he goes a bit AWOL.
Yeah, let us talk about it, because that's his other argument. That's not Gödel, but that is quantum physics. Adam, what's your take on that?
I mean, I think that's a little bit of what I was talking about before, taking one mystery and taking another mystery and putting them together. I mean, I don't see a good reason to think that the particulars of quantum mechanics are really, well, I was about to say I don't have a sense that the particulars of quantum mechanics are really important for the functioning of the human mind, but that's not true, because the brain runs on chemistry and chemistry runs on quantum mechanics. So it depends on what you mean, but the particulars of Penrose's argument, the particular argument he makes about quantum microtubules in human neurons playing a crucial role in consciousness, I don't think that's a particularly good argument.
He does have an argument, to be fair. Sorry,
go ahead.
Just quick, just brief. I mean, his thought is, well, classical physics is kind of computational. He thinks from this Gödel stuff we can get that whatever's going on in human understanding, mathematical understanding, it's not computational. Therefore, there must be something quantum coming in there. I think the alternative is to drop this dogma that everything that's going on in the brain is ultimately explicable in terms of the basic equations of physics, which I've just very, very briefly, more I've talked to, for example, if you ever speak to condensed matter physicists, they often, including a couple of Nobel Prize winners, think their research shows that even the quite simple systems they study are not reducible to the basic equations of physics. I think this is a sort of dogma of philosophers and theoretical physicists.
Yeah, I don't think
Sorry.
that's true. I think, I'm sorry, I've spoken with a lot of condensed matter physicists.
Okay.
I've worked for condensed
You
matter
get your
physicists.
condensed matter
No,
physicists, I'll get
no, hold
mine
on.
and-
I've worked with a lot of condensed matter physicists. I know a lot of condensed matter physicists. Condensed matter physicists are good friends of mine. You, sir,
I've got good
are
friends
not a
here.
condensed
Well, I
matter
love it.
physicist.
We'll come back here next year and get on.
No, but I don't think that they believe in strong emergence. I think that they believe in weak emergence.
Yeah.
Many
No.
of them believe in weak emergence.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
many of them believe in strong emergence.
I don't think so. But hold on a second. I don't think that quantum mechanics gives Penrose a way out of the brain being computational
No,
because
neither do I.
you can express quantum mechanics in computational terms as well.
Right.
You know.
right. I don't buy that bit of it.
I think that. And I say this with a lot of respect for Roger Penrose. I think he's a really phenomenal physicist and a great guy. But I think he's wrong about this. I also think you're wrong. But you're nice too.
Why do you think I'm wrong? Sorry, I also wanted to call.
What's that?
Yeah, and I think you're right, but and you're also nice.
It's always everyone ganging up on me.
Well, I mean, I think there's a point to be made here. We talk a lot about explanations here, right? And very often physicalists, which I think I am because I'm not a dualist and I'm not a panpsychist, are accused of being reductionist. But physicalism is not necessarily reductionist. And I think that one really has to remember that. Physicalism just means that everything that exists, are physical properties, basically. And then the idea is that, well, if that's what you think, then you think that pain, the subjective, this what is like, can be reduced this type of experience to this type of physical properties. No, I don't believe that. In fact, we know that's false. We know pain can be instantiated in all sorts of physical properties.
So it's not a one-to-one correspondence.
It's not a one-to-one correspondence, and that's a really important point. Because if you don't have one-to-one, you're not going to get a certain kind of reductionism. And it can also be that the kinds of concepts that operate on the level of the phenomenal concepts or concepts of cognitive concepts, concept of belief, all those, they don't really match with the concepts that we're used to describe the physical properties. So you can get the mismatched situation here, which means that you're not going to get law-like one-to-one correlations, which means that you're not going to get a certain kind of reduction. That's fine, but it's still physicalism. I'm a Davidsonian. That's very old-fashioned, but I am. You know what that means.
Yeah,
You know what that means.
Okay, but let me ask you now this. It seems that we can agree that it's at least possible that AI one day will be conscious. In your case, it's 5,000 years, fine. In your case,
Give or
not
take.
that long, but give and take, yeah. Then I have a question to you, because I think we can all agree that long before that, they will simulate consciousness in ways that means that we can't distinguish it from human consciousness. We can't separate. They will pass the Turing test in every way. That means that the day they actually become conscious, we will not know, because we will have been fooled long before that. Is that a problem? Is that a danger? How should we cope with that?
I mean, how do we know that you're conscious?
Exactly. That's where I started, right?
That's where it started.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I think.
But you give me human rights, I guess.
Yeah,
And
well,
so how should we treat those AIs?
Look, I think that in the absence of hard evidence that they're not conscious, if they pass every test we can think of for consciousness, we must proceed under the assumption that they are.
That's my point.
And
even before they are.
right, even before they are. Well, and also, I'm not sure. I'm an old-fashioned physicalist. I think that it's possible that if it, walks like a duck and talks like a duck, it's a duck. It may not be possible for it to fully simulate consciousness and completely pass every possible kind of Turing test without being conscious. And we should give it the benefit of the doubt, because I don't want to end up in a situation, and this is going to veer this whole conversation in a different direction, but I don't want to run the risk of basically building slaves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, look at it. Historically, that's what we've done. We thought that animals didn't have consciousness. Descartes, the great philosopher, he thought they were just machines, right? So we could treat them however we liked. And then we didn't think infants had, could experience pain, so we could do surgery on them without anesthesia and so on. So sort of historically, we've made a lot of very bad mistakes. Now, that could happen here too. Although I think that epistemic challenge here is profoundly different. That is to say, how do we know this? This is a totally new kind of creature. How do we know that it's conscious? We don't know the answer to that.
I think that's right.
Well, again, my view is that systems that embodied consciousness will display a certain kind of autonomy, a certain kind of strong emergence, as we've been calling it, will not be totally predictable from the basic equations of physics. So it will become apparent, I think, if we have artificial consciousness, first in simple systems and then...
But so you don't think you can be fooled before they get conscious? You don't think they can fool you into believing they're conscious before they are?
In terms of... it depends how superficially we're thinking. In terms of just external behavior, passing the Turing test, yeah, I mean, perhaps we could get close to something like that. But I guess...
What other evidence are you looking at?
Say again? Well, I mean, I guess we tend to think the behavior systems, not just externally, but in terms of the relationships between the parts internally. So I think there will be evident differences between emergent consciousness in the human brain and in artificial systems.
You mean looking at the physical aspects of it, or what? What does internal mean here?
Yeah, the behavior of the internal aspects of the brain. Yeah. So my view is, given that consciousness evolved and said must make a behavioral difference, there must be systems that embody consciousness must bring into being new causal principles that are not totally explicable in terms of the basic equations of physics. So that would be something that is in principle empirically discernible. So I'm quite optimistic, actually, that we will be able to ultimately... I think we've spent too long sort of trying to simulate the brain and at a superficial level without exploring actually the neurophysiological details of the brain. We know a lot about basic chemistry, how neurons fire, how chemical signals are transmitted. We know a fair bit about what big bits of the brain do. What we're almost clueless on is how large-scale functions of the brain are realized at the cellular level. I think when we start to do that, we'll hone in on what exactly required for consciousness.
But if they will be able to fool us in that sense, passing all Turing tests, do we have to develop AI rights? I mean, a moral system for AIs?
I think we need to give them rights in that case. I mean, if they really are passing every single test that we can throw at them, I don't think that a difference in internal structure is a strong enough argument against their being conscious and having rights. And I am also too wary of finding yet another way to use technological systems to extract wealth and exploit conscious entities, which is something that capitalism is very good at. And this would be another way of doing that.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't even given animals much rights yet, right? So we shall see how that goes, but we probably should if that's where.
But there is at least a trend towards that kind of moral concerns of animals.
Obviously, if we genuinely have artificial consciousness, absolutely consciousness is the basis of moral worth and dignity, the capacity to feel pain, the capacity to consciously understand your own existence and the reality around you. If we create systems that genuinely have that, then we should ascribe them fundamental rights and dignity. But I think, as I say, we're about 5,000 years away from that.
What if AI starts to fall in love with each other?
Fully what?
Fall in love with each other.
With each other, not with us.
Well, that's another aspect, but with each other. Well, I mean, how should we handle that? Shall we let them hang out with each other and not work for us?
Well, totally, if that's what's going on, yeah.
If they're conscious, we should let them do the things that they want to do the same way that we let humans do that.
But Philip, you're not so worried about that, I think.
In the long term, of course.
5,000 years.
Yeah, but... I mean, look, I think that we've got these very sophisticated systems that can, I mean, ChatGPT has never tasted pizza. It's never seen pizza. It has trained how the word pizza props up in strings of human sentences on the internet. It's cannibalized our speech. I don't think that gives us a reason to think it's conscious.
Well, I don't think ChatGPT is conscious.
Right. Or,
No, neither
anything
do
like
I.
it.
Yeah, no, I
Okay.
agree with that.
Okay, point of
Dear
agreement.
panel, our time is out. Thank you so much for participating in this, and thank you for
Thank
listening.
you.
Thank you.